Vermont schools begin cannabis conversations as dispensaries spread across the state. Cannabis dispensaries are continuing to pop up on street corners across Vermont, with some areas like Chittenden County already hosting at least 10 stores. What effect does that have on Vermont students? We've visited schools having conversations about cannabis and how they are navigating the new moral. High school students are still being taught to just say no to underage cannabis use, but the legal market has changed the landscape of educating students on legal weed. In a quote, acknowledging that marijuana laws have changed, it's for sale. So we take a really nuanced view here, which is talking to them about the realities of situations, but also talking to them about where they're at in their actual lives, said Matt Manure, a student assistance programming counselor at Champaign Valley Union High School in Hinsburg. He says despite the various ways to consume, the frequency in which students are getting caught isn't necessarily increasing. The cannabis conversations about habits are continuing, making clear that cannabis can impact the developing brain. In a quote, talking about the decision-making, what choices you want and what life you want to live helps take it all away from it. He says, hey, this is all available to you now. To what type of member of my community do you want to be? He says. What are my habits? Said Manure. These kinds of conversations are happening in classrooms all over Vermont. A 2021 statewide Department of Health Youth Risk Behavior survey shows nearly 1/3 of high school students have tried marijuana. It also increases by grade, going from 16% of students statewide in grade 9 to 46% by grade 12. It's important to note that this data from before is from before retail cannabis became legal. And in a quote, they say, I think the longer that the students put off using for the first time or experimenting for the first time, the easier it gets for them to make those choices and the healthier it will be for them in the end, said Manure. Kelly Doherty, the Department of Health, says Vermont has the second highest percentage of people nationwide aged 12 to 17 reporting using cannabis in the past 30 days. And in a quote, parents are the number one influence on their kids. Our kids are watching us at all time, and they model the behavior that they see. So even with alcohol, we recommend that if parents are using alcohol, keep it kind of out of sight and talk to your kids about the risks of it, said Doherty. Keep it kind of out of sight? That seems kind of weird. She says the messaging from the department remains the same and similar to what schools are saying, advocating against underage use and maintaining healthy habits when users are of age. And in the final quote, she says, we like to focus on helping youth develop healthy coping strategies, again, protecting brain health so they can be their best selves. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's safe, said Doherty. Oh, well, I think that's a page out of Project Sam right there at the end, but I'm going to see what you guys have to say. And this is Jason Beck for the High at 9 News.
I'm glad they're having
I am very
conversations. I
pleased
just
to
hope they
hear
have the
this
right people
because,
for them.
listen, as a mom of 2 teenagers, I have these conversations around all those hot topics, but you need to be backed up by the academic side of their life. That's where they spend about 50% of their life as children at school, right? And so, just as recent as this last week, my daughter's school was having conversations in their science and health classes, talking about healthy choices. And that has to include a conversation around cannabis. It has to. It has to include a conversation in a group format where they can hear out their peers and ask questions and talk about what they've experienced or what they've heard versus what they've experienced, right? And so these conversations need to be happening in a classroom setting. And we all know, whether we want to admit it or not, that the human brain isn't done growing until it's about 24 or 25. And so trying to get kids to abstain from any kind of substance use as long as they possibly can is what's best for them. That's it.
Fair points, Mandy.
I really like it too. I agree a lot with what you said, Mandy. I also there's a few things I want to unpack actually. I don't know why we still use the same Nancy Reagan just say no terminology like that. That is such a propaganda wing of the drug policy of the of the drug prohibitionists. But whatever. But the thing that I think is really cool here is that they're opening these conversations, right, and having them, and then they said they made a very really good point that they said even with all the availability of cannabis and in its different forms and vapes and all these different things that all the prohibitionists say is coming for your kids, they said that they did not see an increase in use. That is really important, right? Because a lot of times what the prohibitionists use as one of their main talking points, Sam and Sabet and the rest of the crew over there, is that as soon as a state goes legal, youth consumption increases dramatically. Your kids will be falling out in the street. Don't do it. Vote no. And obviously, that's not the case. That hasn't been the case in Vermont, and it's not the case in almost every single state that legalization has passed in. So I think that's awesome that they highlighted that. I think they need to update their stats. Using stats that were pre legalization without dispensaries around, I think kind of skews that. But I applaud Vermont for kind of pushing in this direction. I think they should keep going. Education is key.
Yeah.
You know, I just also want to
I
piggyback
love the
on
fact that they're having a conversation.
for the
I was
last
just saying,
2, maybe
yep.
even 3 decades, high schools have been producing on most campuses in California, not all, but most, this program. They put it on during homecoming or prom season. And I think it's called like every 10 minutes or something like that. Basically, it's an anti-drinking campaign during these special party nights when you're in high school. And if we're having those conversations, if we're having conversations about alcohol and accident-related deaths for teenagers, we absolutely should be talking about cannabis with them. There's nothing that should be off limits to talking about with your teenager. Really, nothing.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
I love this that they're getting the dialogue started early, and all states should be having these conversations, and they should be, and the cannabis community should be the centerpiece of this. They should be having open dialogue with all the parents, all the lawmakers, all the educators, so everybody's on the same page, and you don't have all this reefer madness that we see still running rampant in our country.